3 months ago, the author of these lines reveled in life within a luxurious $4.2 million California mansion, surrounded by his beloved wife and adored children. Today, he holds a letter that threatens to turn his entire existence upside down, revealing that his whole life was built on a lie. The irony is that the woman who caused him so much pain may have, unknowingly, saved his life. Fletcher Morrison, 47, was until recently a respected commercial insurance claims specialist in Pasadena. His job involved assessing the damage from others' misfortunes and assisting in their recovery. He lived what seemed to be an ideal life, the embodiment of the so-called American dream. He had a wonderful wife, Cordelia, with whom he had shared 18 happy years of marriage. Their two remarkable children, Quinlan, 16, and Brina, 14, were precocious and the center of his universe. The family resided in a magnificent home in the hills, offering breathtaking views of the city sprawling below like a glittering carpet. Fletcher was confident in who he was. He believed himself to be Fletcher Morrison, son of Winifred Morrison, a modest librarian who had raised him alone after his father's tragic death in a car accident when Fletcher was just 12. His father, as his mother recounted, was an ordinary construction worker who passed away prematurely, leaving her alone with a young son, forced to survive on a librarian's humble salary. Growing up in Ohio, their family didn't live in luxury, but his mother always ensured Fletcher had everything he needed. She was the kind of woman who remembered the birthdays of all relatives and friends, carefully preserved photo albums sorted by year, and made sure he ate his vegetables and did his homework. Cordelia was Fletcher's first love, his high school sweetheart. They met at 17 and 16, respectively, falling deeply in love with youthful abandon. Cordelia was an ambitious and beautiful woman, capable of walking into a room and instantly commanding everyone's attention. After college, she ventured into real estate and achieved incredible success in the field. Together, they built their life, brick by brick, year after year. Children were born. The family moved to California in search of new opportunities, acquired their dream home, and enrolled Quinlan and Brina in prestigious private schools. Quinlan was a sports star, tall and strong, seemingly inheriting his physique from his grandfather, though Fletcher never knew his father well enough to be certain. He played varsity basketball, and by his sophomore year, colleges were already showing interest. Brina, unlike her brother, was a creative soul, an artist like her grandmother. She could draw anything and possessed a unique perspective on the world that made others pause and look at familiar things anew. For 47 years, this narrative was Fletcher's life. He was Fletcher Morrison, a family man, an insurance agent, an Ohio guy who made good in California. He had no reason to doubt any of it. But then everything began to unravel. It all started about a year and a half ago with small things. Cordelia began taking phone calls outside frequently. She came home later and later from work, explaining it away with new clients and big deals. She started looking at Fletcher differently, as if he were a stranger she was trying to decipher. The warmth that had bound them for nearly 2 decades gradually faded until Fletcher felt he was living with someone who barely tolerated his presence. The children noticed the changes too. Quinlan asked why Mom was always angry. Brina started spending more time in her room, drawing darker pictures depicting families that looked broken even when they smiled. Fletcher hoped these were temporary difficulties, perhaps a midlife crisis or work stress. He tried talking to Cordelia, arranged dates, did everything he could to reconnect with the woman he had loved since youth. But nothing helped. On the contrary, his efforts seemed to make her even more distant and hostile. And then came the divorce papers. But these were not just divorce papers. They were a full-scale assault on everything Fletcher knew about himself. According to Cordelia's lawyer, Fletcher was a gambler hiding enormous debts. He was financially irresponsible, possibly dangerous, and certainly unfit for child custody. They had bank statements with transactions Fletcher never made, casino receipts with his signature that he never signed, and testimonies from people claiming he borrowed money from them and never repaid it. None of it was true. Not a single word. But somehow, they had documents to substantiate all these accusations. The courtroom transformed into a sinister theater of life's destruction. He watched as lawyers, like predators, tore apart his past, portraying him as little more than a hardened criminal. His estranged wife, the mother of his children, with whom he had shared a home and bed for 18 years, didn't even grant him a glance. The judge's decision, awarding Cordelia everything, the house, child custody, and even the business, was a crushing blow that felt like something inside him broke. But the real tragedy unfolded beyond the courtroom walls. Cordelia, approaching him with an icy smile full of sinister triumph, whispered, "You'll never see Quinlan and Brina again. I'm taking them to Portland, and you have no means to stop me." At that moment, he realized this wasn't just a divorce, but a meticulously planned, cruel act beyond his comprehension. In just 6 weeks, he had lost his home, his children, and even his insurance agent's license due to fabricated financial misconduct charges. His only refuge became his mother's house in Ohio, which had been empty since her death 2 years prior. Loading the remnants of his life into the trunk of his Honda Civic, he embarked on a 200-mile journey to a place he hadn't lived in for almost 2 decades. It was here that the true story of his downfall and potential rebirth began. The 3-day drive from California to Ohio became an agonizing journey into the past. As he approached his mother's house on Maple Street in Akron, he felt like a ghost returning to former haunts. The house looked exactly as it had on the day of his mother's funeral, a modest, well-maintained 1960s ranch, a symbol of the American middle class. White siding, black shutters, a porch with 2 chairs and a small table where his mother spent evenings with a cup of tea and a library book. For a long time, he sat in the car, hesitant to enter. This was supposed to be a temporary refuge, a place to gather his thoughts and formulate a plan to get his life back on track. But looking at that humble house, he couldn't help but realize the depth of his fall. Just 3 months ago, his bedroom window overlooked downtown Los Angeles. Now he was gazing at Mrs. Patterson's garden gnomes across the street. Winifred Morrison, his mother, had lived in that house for 35 years. She bought it when he was 12, right after his father's death, using insurance payouts and modest savings. It was a purchase driven more by hope than logic. A single mother, working as a librarian, she took on a mortgage, believing her son deserved a backyard and his own room. His mother was the embodiment of quiet strength. After his father's death, she never remarried and, as far as he knew, never even dated anyone. She dedicated herself to raising her son and working at the Akron Public Library. Every morning, she prepared his breakfast and lunch, then walked 6 blocks to work, carrying her food in a brown paper bag. Every evening, she returned home with books for work, for herself, and for him. She knew how to fill their modest life with richness and meaning. They didn't have the means for luxurious vacations, so she created adventures right in their backyard. They'd pitch a tent and sleep under the stars, and she'd tell him stories about the constellations, sipping hot chocolate from a thermos. When he became interested in model airplanes, she'd take on extra shifts at the library to buy him kits, then help him paint the tiny details despite her poor eyesight. Most of all, he remembered his mother's unwavering confidence. She always knew how much money they had, when bills needed to be paid, and what he needed before he even realized it himself. As a widow raising a child alone, she never seemed worried or overwhelmed. She simply solved every problem with astonishing calmness and competence, instilling in him a sense of security he could only appreciate after becoming a parent himself. The man never knew the joy of fatherhood, but he vividly remembered his mother, who raised him alone. Surprisingly, the family never experienced dire financial straits. His mother's income as a librarian was modest, but it was always enough for necessities. When her son needed a new school uniform, the money appeared. When the car broke down, his mother found funds for repairs, and even when he decided to go to college, she managed to pay for his tuition, though she never revealed the secret of her savings. As an adult, a married man, he asked her about it. "Mom, how did you do it? How could you provide everything I needed on your salary?" She merely smiled enigmatically and replied, "When someone you love needs you, you always find a way. All parents do." After his mother's funeral, returning to her house, he felt her presence in every corner. The scent of lavender soap and old books, always associated with home, filled his heart with warmth. The furniture stood in its usual places, as if time had frozen. Her reading glasses lay on the side table next to her favorite armchair. An open library mystery novel rested on the coffee table, with a bookmark on the last page she had read. Walking through the familiar rooms, he felt the weight of his loss pressing down on him. His children, thousands of miles away, had likely heard terrible things about him. His wife had transformed into a stranger, harboring an inexplicable hatred toward him. His career had collapsed, his reputation was shattered, and his bank account was empty. But, standing in his mother's living room, surrounded by her books, photographs, and the atmosphere of a modest but dignified life, he made a decision. The house was the only thing his ex-wife's lawyers couldn't take. Now it belonged to him, entirely and debt-free. It was a gift from the woman who had spent her life ensuring he had a solid foundation. He planned to renovate the house, sell it, and use the proceeds to fight for his children. It seemed like a reasonable plan, but he didn't yet know that a discovery far more valuable than real estate awaited him. The divorce proceedings began 8 months after Cordelia first asked for a separation. He should have seen it coming, but he still held on to hope for reconciliation. He believed the problem lay in their marriage, not something more sinister. He would never forget the morning he was served the papers. He was getting ready for work, as he had every morning for the past 15 years. Coffee, shower, a farewell kiss to his wife, who had barely acknowledged him for months. At 7:30, the doorbell rang, and a process server stood at the threshold with an envelope that would shatter all his perceptions of life. The petition not only demanded a divorce, but also sought to grant Cordelia full custody of the children, the house, his business assets, and even his retirement accounts. But the accusations were the most horrifying part. According to the documents, he was a pathological gambler, hiding enormous debts from his family. He was accused of stealing money from client accounts to fuel his addiction. He was portrayed as financially irresponsible, emotionally unstable, and potentially dangerous to his own children. All of it was a lie. In his entire life, he might have bought 5 lottery tickets, had never been to a casino, and didn't even play poker with friends. He had built his insurance practice on trust and reliability. Every client account was impeccable, every penny accounted for. But somehow, Cordelia's lawyer had provided documentary evidence to support her claims. That same evening, he found her packing in the bedroom. "Cordelia, what the hell is this?" he demanded, shaking the divorce papers. "Gambling? Stealing? You know that's not true." She didn't even look up from folding clothes. "I know what I know, Fletcher, but bank statements don't lie." "What bank statements? Show them to me." Suddenly, as if waking from a long sleep, Cordelia turned to him. In her gaze, he saw something previously unknown, not anger or pain, but a chilling calculation that transformed her into a complete stranger. "You're no longer the man I married," her quiet but merciless verdict rang out. "Perhaps you never were." The 6 ensuing weeks became a nightmarish kaleidoscope of legal consultations, poring over stacks of documents and realizing how his life was shattering into pieces in the hands of strangers. Cordelia's lawyer, the elegant and astute Patricia Voss, presented irrefutable evidence, bank statements showing withdrawals he had never made, casino checks bearing his signature, but from places he had never visited, credit card transactions on online gambling sites he hadn't even known existed. His own lawyer, Robert Chen, a man of principle with whom he usually worked on business contracts, merely shook his head helplessly as he examined the presented evidence. "Fletcher, I have to ask you directly, is any of this true? If you've been hiding gambling debts, I need to know it now so we can minimize the damage." In response, Fletcher could only plead, "Rob, I swear on my children's lives I've never gambled on anything but a church fair lottery ticket. Someone is setting me up, but I don't understand who or why." However, the flood of evidence didn't cease. Witnesses emerged, claiming he had borrowed money from them and never repaid it. An employee from his office testified under oath that he had seen Fletcher placing bets on his phone during lunch breaks. Even his neighbor, Jerry Hallbrook, with whom he had shared many beers, signed an affidavit stating that Fletcher had become increasingly nervous and desperate over the past year. But the most unbearable part was witnessing his children's suffering. Quinlan began avoiding him, preferring to spend time at friends' houses and responding with monosyllabic answers to his attempts to talk about basketball or school. Brina still hugged him goodnight, but in her eyes, he saw confusion, an attempt to reconcile the image of the father she knew with the monster he was portrayed to be. The custody evaluation became a humiliating procedure. The court psychologist, Dr. Martinez, questioned him for 3 hours about his mental health, relationship with his children, and financial habits. She was professional but detached, and he felt she had already reviewed all of Cordelia's accusations before he even entered her office. Mr. Morrison, addiction is often accompanied by denial. Many gamblers become true masters at concealing their behavior from loved ones. He tried to justify himself. "Doctor, I understand that, but I'm not denying it because I'm not addicted. I'm telling you the truth." She merely made notes, promising to include his statements in her report. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. That morning, he drove to court, understanding that he would likely lose his children, but still hoping for a miracle, that the truth would prevail and someone would see through the falsity of the entire charade. The courtroom greeted him with a sterile and cold atmosphere, far removed from the dramatic scenes shown in movies. Judge Patricia Winters, a woman in her 60s, looked as if she had witnessed every conceivable variation of family destruction and had long since ceased to be surprised by anything. Cordelia's lawyer presented her case with surgical precision, bank records, witness testimonies, expert opinions on the detrimental effects of gambling on families. She painted a picture of a man leading a double life, whose addiction had reached such a degree that he stole from clients and lied to everyone who trusted him. His lawyer did everything he could, with only his words against a mountain of documentary evidence. He pointed out inconsistencies in some testimonies, questioned the timing of certain financial transactions, and argued that the evidence was circumstantial. But it wasn't enough. Judge Winters ruled in favor of Cordelia, granting her primary custody of the children, the house, and most of their assets. He was permitted to visit the children every other weekend under supervision, after completing a gambling addiction treatment course and financial counseling. After the consultations concluded, as the protagonist left the courthouse, Cordelia caught up to him in the parking lot. A sinister smile played on her face, as if she had saved the most painful blow for last. She declared that he would never see Quinlan and Brina again, as she planned to move with them to Portland the following month, and he had no means left to oppose her. That evening, alone in an empty apartment, the protagonist tried to comprehend how his life could have changed so drastically in less than a year. Returning to his mother's house was like stepping into a time machine. Everything remained untouched since her passing 2 years ago. Her coffee mug still sat in the dish drainer by the sink, her reading glasses lay on the table next to her favorite armchair, and her slippers were neatly placed by the bed, as if she had just stepped out for a second and would return at any moment. For the first few weeks, he barely left the living room couch. Every morning, he woke up hoping it was just a nightmare, that he would open his eyes and find himself in his California bedroom, with Cordelia sleeping beside him and the children getting ready for school. But each morning, his gaze fell on a water stain on the ceiling, reminding him that his old life was gone, perhaps forever. Depression descended upon him like a physical weight. Sometimes, he couldn't even bring himself to shower or make coffee. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Quinlan and Brina, wondering what Cordelia was telling them about their father's absence. Were they worried about him? Did they think he had abandoned them? Did they believe the lies about gambling and theft? However, after a month of self-pity, something broke inside him. Perhaps it was his mother's voice in his head, reminding him that problems don't disappear just by wishing them away. Perhaps it was an instinct for self-preservation. In any case, he realized that to get his children back, he needed money, and the house was his only remaining asset. The house needed repairs. His mother had done her best to maintain it, but at 70, she couldn't manage everything anymore. The kitchen cabinets needed refinishing, the bathroom needed updating, and the entire house needed a fresh coat of paint. To raise enough funds for a legal battle, the house had to be put in order. He threw himself into the renovation, as if possessed. He stripped wallpaper, sanded floors, painted every room. The physical labor became an outlet after months spent in lawyers' offices where he felt helpless. Every nail hammered, every wall painted was a small victory over those who tried to destroy him. The basement was the final stage. His mother had used it primarily for storage, and it was cluttered with decades of accumulated items. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old photo albums, his elementary school projects that she had for some reason kept. Sorting through her belongings was emotional, but at the same time, comforting. It reminded him of who he was. his roots, the woman who had raised him to be honest, hard-working, and decent. It was then that he noticed something strange near the furnace. In the corner of the basement stood an old oil furnace converted to gas in the 1990s, but never moved from its original spot. The concrete floor around it looked different from the rest of the basement. There were fresh scratches, and on closer inspection, he noticed that the dust had settled in an unusual way. It seemed the furnace had recently been moved, which was impossible. His mother had died 2 years ago, and before that she had been too weak to lift anything heavier than a book. The furnace weighed several hundred pounds. She couldn't have moved it herself, and he couldn't think of any reason why she would have needed to. But the evidence was clear: scratches on the concrete, strange dust patterns, and even fresh scuffs on the furnace itself. In the basement of the house, where no one had set foot since his mother's passing, Fletcher stumbled upon an old furnace, miraculously preserved in its original state. He spent almost an entire day moving the massive unit, first cautiously disconnecting the gas line. Then, armed with a furniture dolly and levers, he shifted the furnace about 3 feet from the wall. The immense effort left his back aching, but the result surpassed all expectations. Behind the furnace, seemingly embedded in the concrete wall at shoulder height, he discovered a small safe, whose existence Fletcher had never even suspected. This old-fashioned combination safe, about 18 inches square, was painted the same gray as the basement wall, creating an effect of invisibility. The metal gleamed in places from polished areas, as if it had been opened countless times over the years. The safe bore no brand name or any other identifying marks that would indicate its age or origin. For about 20 minutes, Fletcher stared, mesmerized by the find, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. How long had the safe been there? Why had his mother never mentioned it? What valuable secret lay hidden behind the furnace? The combination lock with numbers from 0 to 99 offered 10,000 possible combinations, which seemed to make cracking it an impossible task. But suddenly, a detail from the past resurfaced in his memory. Every year, on March 15th, Fletcher's birthday, his mother would call him at precisely 7:23 a.m. Not a minute later, not a minute earlier. She always explained that it was the exact time of his birth, and she wanted to mark the very moment he came into the world. March 15th, 1977, 03:15:77. Fletcher's hands trembled as he began to turn the dial. Right to 03, left to 15, right to 77. A second stretched agonizingly long. Then, a soft click sounded, and the heavy door swung open. What was revealed inside overturned all his perceptions of life. The safe proved deeper than it looked from the outside and was filled to capacity. The first thing that caught his eye was money, an incredible amount of cash, more than Fletcher had ever seen. Stacks of $100 bills, bound with rubber bands, some old and yellowed, others crisp and new. With trembling hands, he pulled them out, counting as he went. $847,000 to be precise. Beneath the money lay documents, several driver's licenses with his mother's photo, but under different names: Isabella Reyes from New Mexico, Maria Santos from Arizona, Catherine Walsh from Nevada. In the photos, his mother appeared at different ages, but it was unmistakably her. Younger versions of the quiet librarian who had raised Fletcher, but with a guarded expression in her eyes that he had never noticed during her lifetime. There were also Social Security cards corresponding to the IDs, birth certificates, and even a passport in the name of Isabella Reyes, issued in 1988. All the documents appeared authentic, not fakes, but official government papers. His mother, Winifred Morrison, had apparently lived under different names for decades. At the very bottom of the safe lay a sealed envelope with Fletcher's name written in his mother's neat handwriting. His real name, not an alias, just Fletcher, in the same handwriting he had seen on birthday cards and grocery lists his entire life. Exhausted, he sank to the floor and tore open the envelope. Inside were 3 pages covered in his mother's script, and the very first line made his blood run cold. My dearest Fletcher, if you are reading this, they have finally found you, and I am no longer here to protect you. The rest of the letter shattered everything he believed. Your real name is Fletcher Castellano. Your father did not die in a car accident when you were 12. His name was Vincent Castellano, and he was murdered by the Torino crime family in Chicago on September 18, 1989. I witnessed his murder because I was supposed to die with him, but I escaped. I took you and ran. And 3 months later, I testified against your father's killers before a federal grand jury." Fletcher had to stop reading. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold the paper. Vincent Castellano. Not Vincent Morrison, the construction worker who died in a car accident, but Vincent Castellano, murdered by the mafia. And his mother wasn't just a widow trying to survive, she was a federal witness. New details emerged during the investigation, directly related to the federal case. The letter continued, "We entered the Witness Protection Program in January 1990. I changed my name to Winifred Morrison, and you became Fletcher Morrison. Akron, Ohio was our new home, where we hoped to start fresh. The government provided us with new documents, a modest sum to get settled, and a guarantee of safety, provided we cut all ties to our past and never revealed our true identities." The picture began to clarify. It became clear why his mother always had money despite her modest librarian's salary, why she avoided talking about life before moving to Ohio, and why she taught her son not to trust strangers or disclose personal information. He had thought it was simply care, but now he understood that his mother had been saving their lives. The money in the safe is the remainder of the government compensation and savings accumulated through a cautious lifestyle. But there's something else you need to know. Unfortunately, I learned this too late to warn you. His heart pounded in his chest. I hired private investigators to watch you in California, starting 3 years ago. Not out of mistrust, but due to rumors of renewed interest in the Castellano family. What they discovered broke my heart. Your wife, Cordelia, was cooperating with the people who had been looking for us for decades. They found you through her. The world swam before his eyes. Cordelia, his first love, the mother of his children, the woman he had loved for 20 years, was working with his father's murderers. I don't know if she understood what she was getting into, or if she was manipulated as they tried to manipulate you. The divorce, the false gambling accusations, all of it was planned to break you financially and emotionally, forcing you back to Ohio. They wanted to lure you here, knowing I might have left something that would lead them to other witnesses or evidence in the old case. Nausea rose in his throat. All the horrors of the past year, losing his home, his children, his reputation, had been orchestrated by people who had been hunting his family for over 30 years. But his mother had left him not only money and the truth, but also a way to fight back. At the bottom of the letter is a phone number. Call Marshal Theodore Vance of the U.S. Marshal Service. He's been waiting for this call since my death. Tell him you are Vincent Castellano's son, and you are ready to finish what we started. The number was written in red and underlined 3 times. Below, his mother had left a final message. "Forgive me for not telling you the truth while I was alive. I wanted to give you a normal life, a chance at happiness, without the fear of looking back. But I always knew this day might come. You are stronger than you think, Fletcher. In your veins runs the blood of people who don't back down, even when the odds are against them. Your father would be proud of you. I am proud. Use the money wisely. Get your children back. Remember that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you're supposed to be." He sat in the basement for about an hour, trying to process what he had read. His entire life had been a lie, but not one that humiliated, rather one that protected him until he was strong enough to face the truth. Then he picked up the phone and dialed Marshal Theodore Vance's number. Marshal Vance answered almost instantly, as if he had been waiting for this call for 35 years. "Vance? Marshal Vance, this is Fletcher Morrison, though I guess my real name is Fletcher Castellano." After a long pause, a deep breath. "Son, I've been waiting for this call since your mother died. Where are you now?" "I'm at my mother's house in Akron, next to the open safe she left me." "Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone. Don't leave the house. I'll be there in 4 hours." Arriving in 4 hours. The message was delivered curtly. Marshal Vance, a man with graying hair past 60, seemed like someone whose eyes had witnessed every conceivable human depravity but had never quite grown accustomed to it. Accompanied by 2 federal agents, he spent 6 long hours meticulously examining the legacy left by the protagonist's mother. Documenting papers, cataloging evidence, and endless questions about his life in California, all were part of the painstaking work. "Your mother was one of the bravest people I've ever worked with," Vance said as they sat at the kitchen table late into the night. She foresaw that they would eventually track down her son, and she carefully prepared for this day. The money, the safe code tied to your birth date, even hiring private detectives to watch you in California. She wanted these resources to be in his hands precisely when they were most desperately needed. The scale of what had happened proved even more horrifying than imagined. The Torino crime family had systematically pursued witnesses in the murder case of the protagonist's father for decades. However, over time, they refined their methods. Instead of direct elimination, which attracted undue federal attention, they learned to ruin lives more subtly. They found vulnerabilities in their target's circles, compromised loved ones, and then used them to create chaos and financial ruin. They had been working your case for at least 5 years, Marshall Vance explained. They found Cordelia through her real estate connections. A chain of acquaintances led them to the right criminals. They likely started by offering legitimate services, which gradually escalated into something sinister. Meanwhile, the detectives hired by his mother conducted their own investigation, meticulously documenting every step. They had records of Cordelia's meetings with individuals connected to the Torino organization, evidence of money transfers, the creation of fake documents, and the bribing of witnesses to give false testimony. The story about gambling addiction, the fabricated bank statements, all of it was their handiwork. According to Marshall Vance, a similar scheme had been applied to 6 other witnesses over the past 15 years, creating financial and legal chaos, undermining trust in the victim, and then waiting for them to return to their roots. However, there was one factor the Torino family hadn't accounted for. His mother's death from natural causes 2 years prior had activated certain protocols within the U.S. Marshals Service. They had maintained covert surveillance on the situation, waiting to see if anyone would appear in Ohio seeking refuge. "We've been watching this area for 2 years, Marshall Vance admitted. "We knew that if they forced you back here, they would eventually make their move. We documented everyone who showed unusual interest in this address." The most shocking revelation awaited the next morning. Cordelia was arrested at her hotel in Portland at 6:00 a.m., along with 3 men who were accompanying her. She believed she was cooperating with private detectives, helping her achieve more favorable divorce terms. She had no idea of their ties to organized crime until federal agents revealed the truth to her in the interrogation room. "She agreed to testify," Marshall Vance reported over coffee. "It turns out she's as much a victim as you are. They convinced her that you were hiding gambling debts and connections with other women. They provided her with fake evidence, intimidated and angered her, and then offered to help protect her children and ensure her financial well-being." The hardest phone call of his life was made to Quinlan and Brina. They were staying with Cordelia's sister in Portland, confused and frightened by their mother's arrest, and no one wanted to explain the reasons to them. "Dad." Quinlan's voice was quiet and childlike, not at all like the confident teenager he remembered. "Hi, buddy. I know things are really confusing right now, but I want you to know everything will be okay. Your mom and I love you very much, and none of this is anyone's fault." "Are you really a gambler?" Brina asked, taking the phone. "Mom said you stole money, and that's why we had to move." "No, sweetie. I never gambled or stole anything. Very bad people lied about me to hurt our family, but the police caught them. We'll be together again very soon." It took a full 6 months of intense work to legally unravel the tangled web of lies and intrigue. The evidence painstakingly gathered by the protagonist's mother, combined with Cordelia's testimony and the federal case materials against the Torino crime organization, became the irrefutable force that completely cleared his name. The fake records of gambling addiction crumbled like a house of cards, exposed as crude forgeries. Witnesses who had previously given false testimonies, one by one, recanted their statements, unable to bear the burden of deception. Ultimately, the protagonist's insurance license was reinstated, and the state board issued him an official apology for the damage caused. Unfortunately, restoring the previous relationship with Cordelia proved impossible. The wounds were too deep, too many lies had been told, and too much trust had been irrevocably lost. However, despite this, they decided to join forces for the well-being of their children, striving to help them comprehend what had happened and understand the reasons behind the tragic events. Cordelia, tormented by guilt for succumbing to manipulation and almost destroying her own family, sought help from a psychotherapist. The protagonist, in turn, is also undergoing therapy, trying to heal his emotional wounds and learn to trust people again. But most importantly, they managed to get their children back, and that became their greatest reward. The house in Ohio was sold, and the proceeds were sufficient to purchase a modest home in California and fund both children's college education. Quinlan returned to the basketball team, and according to his coach, college interest in him remains high despite the difficulties that arose during his junior year. Brina's artwork began to feature brighter and more hopeful tones, although her paintings still often depicted families who had endured difficult trials. The protagonist thinks of his mother every day, of the sacrifice she made to give him a normal childhood. He admires her courage, demonstrated by testifying against the murderers, and the 35 years of her life spent in constant anxiety. She saved his life twice, the first time when he was just 12, and the second time at the age of 47. Sadly, he never had the opportunity to express his gratitude for everything she did for him. The Torino trial is scheduled for next year, and the protagonist intends to testify, just as his mother once did. However, this time, he does not intend to run afterward. This time, he intends to finish what she started. Sometimes, the worst events in life lead a person exactly where they are meant to be. The protagonist's mother knew this and ensured that even after her death, she continued to protect her son.